So in this video, we're going to talk about how to find the slope if you're given a table and also if you're given 2 points. And so I've got this table here, and it's got 5 points on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to graph these points, and we'll figure out the slope. But then I'll show you a way to find the slope without having to graph it. Or if you're just given this table, you can figure out the slope without having to graph it. But let's graph it first to help us see the slope a little better. So -1, -3, there would be our first point. Over 1 up 0, over 3 up 3, over 5, let's see, 4, 5 up 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then over 7 up 9. So if you notice, these points are all in a row, and we'll connect those with a line. So this is a linear relationship, we call this. And let's use green for this line. There we go. Cool. So there's our line. It's not on there perfectly. Let me see if I can move it a little better. That's better. Okay. So we've got our line. And then to find the slope, all we do is we just count the rise and the run. So the slope, we always say, is rise over run. So it's up 3 over 2. So our slope in this case is 3 over 2. Now, a couple different things with slope. I'll kind of come down here and we'll write a few things, then we'll go back above. So the slope, I said, was rise over run. We also say it is the change in y. So change in y over change in x. You'll often see it written as delta y over delta x. This is another way that you'll see slope written. It's just a symbol that stands for change. And so the change in y here is 3, and the change in x is 2, so we just write 3 over 2. We'll come back to this stuff down below here in just a minute on the next example, but let's continue on with this first example. And if you notice, we keep going, oh, that's not what I wanted. We keep going up 3 over 2, up 3 over 2, up 3 over 2. And so it keeps repeating this pattern. That's the slope. The next point would be up 3 and over 2 from this last point that we have. Now, what if you didn't have a graph and you needed to find the slope of this given table? Well, one way to do that is we just figure out what's the change in y. So the change in y here, change in y is up 3. Here, change in y is 3. Here, 3. And so on. You kind of see the pattern now. And here, the change in x is up 2. Here we're going up 2. Up 2. So the slope, remember I said, is the change in y divided by the change in x. Well, the slope is just 3 over 2. So if you're given a table of values and you have to figure out the slope, rather than graphing them, which graphing them is great so you can kind of visualize what it's going to look like, you could just find the difference like this. So let's do this kind of the same idea, but this time I'm going to give you 2 points. And maybe what would be wise is if you pause the video here and see if you can figure out the slope without my help, and then see if you can come up with a formula. Rather than just having to graph it each time, what would be a general formula for this? So I'll do it now. If you want to give it a shot on your own, pause the video like I said. So -4, 5 would be back 4, 1. Let's see, I'm going to switch colors. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then up 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's our first point. And then our second point is -1, 7. Back 1 from the origin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There would be our next point. And so you can kind of imagine there's a line going through these 2 points. And to figure out the slope, we're just going to go up 2 over 3. So the slope here is 2 over 3. But then my challenge to you was, well, what would be a general equation for this? And so what I want you to try to think about is if we went from 5 to 7, that's how far the y changed. And then the x change, we went from -4 to -1. And so a formula that you'll often see with this is they'll say, we'll take the y2 minus the y1 and divide that by the x2 minus the x1. Well, what they mean by y2 and y1 is you've got 2 points here, and the first point we call x1, y1, because it's the first point, and then the second point we call x2, y2. So for this formula, all I'm going to do is I'm going to take y2, which is 7, and plug it in for that first part of the equation. So 7, and then minus, and then what I do is I take y1, that's 5, and I'm going to plug it in to where it is y1 in the equation. So 7 minus 5, and all of that divided by, and then I've got x2, which is -1, minus, and then let's see if I've got another color here, we'll go with pink, minus x1, which is -4, and what do we get? So we've got 7 minus 5 is 2, and then 1 minus -1 minus -4 is the same as saying -1 plus 4, so that would be 3. And that would be our slope of our line, and this general formula works every time. So this formula right here, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, that is the slope formula if you're given 2 points. Slope formula. Now, you don't have to memorize this formula. You can just remember it's the change in y divided by the change in x. And that's exactly what we did. We subtracted the y's to figure out how much it changed. We subtracted the x's to figure out how much that changed. Another thing that I might tell some students, if you felt really good about the first example, but you are kind of like, I'm never going to remember this formula. Well, hey, come on here. Software, don't do that to me. So you could just make yourself a table. So if you feel comfortable with the table, just make a table and then put these points in there. -4, 5, and then -1, 7. And guess what? The y's went up by 2. The x's went up by 3. So my slope is going to be 2 over 3. So many ways to figure out the slope. You could graph it. You could use the formula. You could turn it into a table. Any way you want to do it. They're all the same. They're all just doing it different ways, but they're all doing it the same. All right, so that's how to find the slope if you're given a couple points or if you're given a table.